Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and dear audience. On behalf of Conflict and Resilience Research Institute Canada, I welcome all of you to witness Realize Radicalization's sixth webinar in this season. Realize Radicalization is a Winnipeg based youth driven small group which works in counter radicalization intervention processes and programs. And today we are very happy that Mr. Brandon Rigato joined with us from Ottawa. So traditionally, before we begin, we do treaty acknowledgement. And Conflict and Resilience Research Institute Canada is located on original lands of Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of Métis Nation. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in the spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Ladies and gentlemen, the title of our today's Realize Radicalization webinar is Battle Ready Courts, Heroic Imagery, and Violence Preparedness, How the Canadian Right-Wing Extremist Memes. So without further ado, let me welcome Mr. Caden Lee, who leads the Realize Radicalization group. Mr. Caden Lee, floor is yours.
Hello, I'm Caden Lee from Realize Radicalization, and I am joined by my fellow members Luke Fontaine-Richardson and Brendan Carlson. We are also joined by Dr. Kauser Ahmed, the Executive Director of CRIC, and Andre Lafort of the Winnipeg Police Service. Tonight we have a presentation by Brandon Rigato, a PhD candidate at Carleton University and junior research affiliate with the Canadian Network for Research on Terrorism, Security, and Society, more commonly known as TSIS. Brandon's presentation tonight focuses on how far-right extremists use memes. This may sound ridiculous to most, but for those who research far-right movements, they are aware of the importance of memes within these online echo chambers that are permeated by right-wing extremist followers and sympathizers. I myself first became aware of this last year while attempting to understand how Patrick Matthews, a man from small-town Manitoba and a CAF reservist, could become a fully radicalized member of a neo-Nazi terrorist organization called The Base. After searching through various platforms utilized by people like Patrick, sites like 4chan and the encrypted messenger Telegram, I quickly became aware of how important memes are as a means of communication between these people who utilize these platforms. So without further ado, I will throw it to our presenter, Brandon Rigato, to begin his presentation.
Thank you for that introduction, Caden. That was very nice of you. So as stated, my presentation today is called Battle Ready Quotes, Heroic Imagery, and Violence Preparedness, How the Canadian Right-Wing Extremist Meme. This is a co-authored piece with Dr. Alex Wilner. And thank you so much for Realize Radicalization and CRIC for inviting me here today. So an overview of my presentation. Section 1 begins with the research project, what inspired our research. Section 2, methodology, how we classified memes. Section 3, findings, what our data revealed. So the research project overview, I identify right-wing extremism by drawing on Parent and Ellis, 2014. They're also TSAS affiliates, and they write that it's a large, loose, heterogeneous collection of groups and individuals espousing a wide range of grievances and positions, including anti-government, individual sovereignty, racism, fascism, white supremacy, white nationalism, anti-Semitism, nativism, anti-immigration, anti-globalization, anti-free trade, anti-abortion, homophobia, anti-taxation, and pro-militia, pro-guns rights stances. My addition to their definition is to include Islamophobia. So right-wing extremists throughout time have had a long-standing tradition of capitalizing on emerging mediums such as posters, pamphlets, radio stations, websites to recruit and promote their worldviews. However, there's scarce research unpacking how right-wing extremists use digital social media and memes in particular for communication. And as with most things, there's even less research examining how Canadians utilize the affordances of digital social media to promote right-wing extremism through web forums and memes. So Given the importance of Facebook in promoting right-wing movements generally, as we saw with Yellow Vests, Pegida, various Odin groups, etc., we chose this as a social media platform to study. This project seeks to begin an understanding of how memes are utilized by Canadian Facebook groups that espouse right-wing extremist worldviews and distribute such content. So the research project has a twofold objective: identify and categorize memes that are being shared across right-wing extremist Canadian Facebook groups using a content analysis, and showcase findings to provide greater insight to academics and policymakers as to the ideology behind memes being shared. So the methodology, we view memes as a distinct form of communication, and we classify memes as, like, while often associated with humorous pictures, they have and continue to be a source for communicating ideology, religion, and political views. However, we have also seen that memes are used to promote misogyny, sexism, racism, and a variety of bigoted worldviews. Further unpacking memes and relying on Roland Barthes by the way of Dobson and Nezevich, we see that captions are often used to anchor an image. What this means is, while a picture may be worth 1,000 words, captions and text superimposed are meant to limit one's ability to interpret what is taking place. Essentially, memes are purposeful and want a clear message and narrative to be communicated to the receiver. So, group selection. The data was compiled in November 2019. Due to its popularity at the time, we began by focusing on Yellow Vest Canada. We then allowed the recommendations of Facebook's other groups you may like function to direct our selection. We sort of tongue-in-cheek called this an algorithmic snowball sample, meaning we were allowing, Facebook's algorithms to dictate what we chose. We thought 15 groups in total was a decent sample, and of the 15, we would choose 50 memes per group. So how we chose the 15? They must be openly Canadian. Through name or location, they had to identify as Canadian. They must be open groups, meaning they're not private pages that would require deception to access. They must demonstrate through their group manifestos and individual contributions that they espoused and supported discriminatory, racist, xenophobic, and largely bigoted viewpoints, views that fall in line with what researchers would identify as right-wing extremist beliefs. They must have at least 100 images posted by the page administrators or followers, and to ensure a variety of accounts and pages are examined, the pages tracked through our algorithmic snowball sample must not share the namesake of another group already in our data set. So although we started with Yellow Vest Canada, we didn't want to just choose like Yellow Vest Northern Territories, Yellow Vest Ottawa. We went for other groups, which you will see in coming slides. So the groups selected were these 15. Those with the red asterisks are still operational on Facebook as of 2 weeks ago. However, many of these groups, although they may have been banned from Facebook, or now may only operate on Twitter, Gab, or an alternative platform. So just because they're not currently on Facebook doesn't mean they folded entirely. It just means I couldn't see them when I last checked. And some of these groups will disappear and then come back. So it's something you really have to stay on top of. So content analysis, we relied on grounded theory, which basically means we create categories by letting the data speak for itself. So we compiled 750 memes, and of those, we actually just went and looked through them all, and that's how we sort of generated our classifications, was just by really sorting through all the memes we came across. So the first 50 images from each of the 15 pages using an app called Down Album is what made up our sample. And that gave us 750 memes in total. However, because memes could meet the criteria for many classifications, we ended up with 984 in total, as memes aren't all going to fit in with one strict narrative. So broad categories. Before delving into the child nodes, every category here has multiple nodes beneath it, but there's essentially three things going on here. There's two forms of opposition, which is number one, it's a political opponents. And number three is ideological and religious opponents. Whereas number two is sort of a self-promotion and bravado from these members. So I'm just going to go over some of the benign images that I found. Again, these are not cherry-picked, but they're definitely the least offensive. So these are section 1, it's opposing political parties and politicians. And what you'll see here is, again, these would also meet the criteria for Islamophobia. However, we also see that Trudeau is uniquely positioned as someone who is enabling what many of these groups like Cultural Action Party fear as a Islamic takeover of Canada. So we see here issues about funding in the first image, that Daesh fighters returning is, it's a way for Trudeau to sort of shore up his base, according to these individuals. Whereas the middle meme we see here from Cultural Action Party is sort of suggesting that these three supposed Muslim politicians, again, I don't know that, but they're accused, like they're sort of argued to be by these members, are being put in positions of power to sort of shore up the strength and promote a Sharia takeover of Canada, if you will. And I'm borrowing their rhetoric. I can't stress that enough. And then there's, sort of things like we see Trudeau celebrating Daesh, and just ways to make him look foolish is very common and something that occurs throughout quite frequently. The second one is self-righteous defenders and protectors of Western tradition. So it was harder to pick memes that I thought were suitable to share here, but these are very cringeworthy, and it's incredibly uncomfortable to look at these, because there's sort of this fantasy that's being conveyed that if you're a part of a group like the Clan Canada or Canadian Infidels or the Three Percenters Canada, that you take on this heroic sort of last defender against this imagined Islamic takeover of Canada. And that's why you see a lot of these bizarre quotes like "fear not death," and it sort of goes into I call it Shakespearean sort of tone. It's very uncomfortable, but there's so much of this found throughout. Threatening groups, beliefs, and institutions. So we see here the first one is "Hurry up, Mom, I have to go fight fascism." And this is the most benign attack on groups like Antifa, right? It's usually very homophobic, but this was, suitable for a broad audience. The second one here, you can see an incredibly racist sort of division here. It's a Syrian refugee family founded a chocolate company, and I don't know if this is accurate or not, but it doesn't really matter because it's being shared amongst these individuals. So the fact that they want to hire 50 Muslim refugees is seen to be detrimental to real Canadians. And as you can see here, it's racialized individuals versus white people at the bottom. The racism is so blatant. But then the other examples here are sort of the more paranoid and conspiratorial thinking about carbon taxes, and how sort of refugee funding is secretly bringing about this United Nations one world government. And under this one world government, we're all going to be forced to convert to Islam, and George Soros is somehow involved. And if you're confused, you're not alone, but I'm just conveying what they think. So the content analysis findings, we can come back to this after, but I'm just going to go over the three top findings so far per category. So the Liberals were, as far as political opponents, the most attacked. And of that, it's Trudeau and his sort of promotion of Islam that seemed to be uniquely problematic from these groups' perspectives, right? He's seen as propping up this sort of Sharia stranglehold on Canada, according to these groups. Surprisingly, Democrats are discussed more frequently than the NDP. So as far as self-righteous defenders go, this is the sort of pro-police, pro-military type of commentary that we see quite regularly. However, what's most surprising about these findings is that self-depictions dictating what these groups are, what they believe, and why you should join them made up the bulk of the memes, or the most popular form of memes throughout this content analysis. So those encouraging people to sort of take their activism from online to offline was the most popular form of meme we found. And then in the third section, unsurprisingly, Islamophobia made up the second most popular memes found throughout. Of this, there was a surprising sort of, at least to me, was the amount of attention paid to sort of halal certification and companies that promote halal products, and how there's all these like sort of, you know, supposed graphs on how this connects to terrorism, and how certain fast food companies are endorsing this takeover of Canada, sort of in cahoots with Trudeau. Again, it's sort of hard to follow the logic, but that's what I'm finding. Summary. So in these spaces, memes are purposeful. In the context of these groups, we see that identity reinforcing memes take precedent above all else. We then see memes used to target their enemies, which liberal politicians and Muslims, and those that are seen to be in cahoots with them. Future research. With the groups that have lasted, we plan to perform another content analysis here. The objective will be to assess disparity and perhaps new targets. I want to draw attention to the need to archive data. Again, once these pages disappear, so does the data. Researchers in the future will be left with less material to unpack this. All this information that I've said today will be compiled in a research essay that's forthcoming. And I just want to thank you all so much for listening to me today. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much for that. So for everyone viewing, please type into the comment section on YouTube, and then we'll be able to pull the comments out from the side. For at the moment, I want to throw it over to Andre Lafort. Andre, do you have any questions you'd like to ask Brandon?
Yeah, absolutely. Brandon, thank you so much for that presentation. Definitely some really interesting but disheartening information, obviously, that's coming from our fellow Canadians. So the one thing that I'm thinking of is, you know, when we think about some of the, I'll say, advertisement or awareness that's happened, especially with COVID, and talking about how many children have been exploited during COVID just because of the extreme amount of time they've been at home and exposed to online stuff. Do you guys think that you'll be looking at, or is there any information as far as relating to some of the exploitation, I'll say, or just the memes maybe that are starting to become more focused towards youth to sort of pull in more people, more young people into this sort of twisted train of thought? That way, maybe memes that are geared more towards kids, I'll say.
I'm actually part of a project right now that's with Dr. Jen Evans and Dr. Sandra Robinson out of Carleton University, and that's a big part of our ongoing research. I don't have any findings to share today, and not that they're my findings to share, right? I'm just an RA on their project, but there is a lot of research ongoing right now with groups that I'm a part of that is looking at that, because COVID is sort of tied into that conspiratorial thinking that I highlighted with the carbon tax. The memes that I've seen, it's sort of as if you know, it's a hoax, right? It's a way for people to inject chips in you, you know, take your pick, right?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. And then that's kind of why, when I first found out when Caden and I had spoken, he told me about tonight, it was kind of one of the things that, I just keep seeing it as far as, I get exposed to sort of more the law enforcement side and the exploitation, even though that is definitely not my background and not my specialty with Winnipeg Police. But just the awareness of it and thinking, it will be interesting to see, unfortunately, how some of these memes may change, as you said, to sort of, I'll say, lure or make it look more attractive, I'll say, to youth going forward. And then the other thing that I was thinking about, I don't have a Facebook account. A lot of law enforcement doesn't, but my husband does, and he's ex-military. So, of course, a lot of the people that he would communicate with or have ties with are usually ex-military and ex-army. And it's interesting because now with some of the enforcement that's happening with social rules, social guidelines, depending on what province you're in. And you're starting to see a little bit more of the, it used to sort of seem as though military or sort of militia style groups were maybe in support of police. And now it almost seems like there's a bit of that fraction away where they're starting to, the negativity towards police is really starting to come out with Facebook as well. So I'm kind of wondering if we're going to maybe see anything that way as far as the memes go, if maybe even a farther fraction of us against them. We definitely don't want them on our side anyways. But it's been definitely interesting to start to see even just the vocal things that are happening that way on social media platforms.
Yeah, no, I agree. I will have more detailed, and I don't like to say things without numbers to back them up, but there definitely is a divide in some sort of these communities. A lot of them do want to advocate that they're proud supporters of the police and the military. Whether they are or not is sort of relevant. I think it's more of a defense mechanism, right? Because if the police ever do take an interest in them, it's like, oh, I think in their minds they're thinking, oh, well, they're on our side, so we're going to let them go. I think that's the defense mechanism, right? So,
yeah,
obviously
I would
they're
agree
not
with you
doing a
absolutely.
good job.
Yeah, I think the disillusionment runs rampant, I think, across a lot of these groups. So, yeah, I'll be really interested to see what you guys come up with in the future. Thank you.
There you go.
I wanted to see, though, with that, like that military and sort of anti-police sentiment that's growing is sort of correlated to like the rise of QAnon. And then, of course, we've seen what happened with the Capitol riots on the 6th, right? So it seems that like QAnon initially started as this organization that was very pro-police, but then over time, it seems to develop a lot of these like sovereignist movements, mentalities, and these sort of like connections with militia groups. So that's kind of interesting. What's your perspective on that, Andrea? Yeah, sorry, Andrea.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, I definitely agree with what you've just said that way. It's been interesting, I think, maybe at least from my perspective, and I really can only speak from mine, is just sort of sitting back and watching, and I'm not a huge social media person, but watching sort of what's been happening and definitely seeing that, they're almost wanted, I don't know if they tried to affiliate themselves with law enforcement that way, that maybe they would be perceived as, as the good guys. And definitely then when they started to see, that law enforcement was not behind this and definitely didn't condone it, then you see more of that fracture. And I think it will be interesting to see for us as far as, we seem to be picking up more enemies, I will say. And we're okay with members like QAnon and whether it's Proud Boys or 3%ers. With those guys, I'll say coming to the realization that we are not them, and we're not in the same camp as them for sure. So I think that way, at least it is a good thing. I think that's a realization that they had to see, and maybe that the public had to see. But what it means down the line, I don't know. Does that mean that they start picking up more targets? When you look at someone like Justin Bork, who is definitely anti-government, but then lashed out really at police, even though they are federal government. It will be interesting to see, I'll say, sort of what happens with that, or if there's a level of violence that's associated with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for all of us here, we hope that's not the case. Go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you, Brandon. I was thinking from your presentation, you have categorized, the most number of memes that you have collated. So there are about Islamophobia, there are about self-righteousness. But have you noticed some bit of these memes with regards to anti-Semitism? I mean, what is the prevalence of anti-Semitic memes that you might have seen in your research?
The pages that I follow have been very careful to not promote anti-Semitism in this sample, and that's a finding in it of itself, because I'm not suggesting that they're proud supporters of their fellow Jewish Canadians or anything like that, but I think they perceive that there would be more backlash if they were openly anti-Semitic, whereas I think Islamophobia it definitely is much more broadly endorsed politically, culturally right now. So it's a safer target, for lack of a better term.
It's very interesting, Brandon. I just, Caden, sorry, I'll finish it within 30 seconds. So, Brandon, in the in 15, 16, before Mr. Trump, of course, came in and opened the gate. But at that time, we have seen a lot of Islamophobia was driven through the groups like EDL and JDL in Canada, particularly. So, have you seen those groups are still operating and they are using memes through any platforms that they're using?
Yeah, my actual dissertation work, which is separate from this, looks at the English Defence League and the Canadian Defence League, and they're some of the most heinous memes and posts you'll find. They often endorse violence. It's amazing that they lasted as long as they did. They're incredibly Islamophobic and a dangerous group.
Thank you, Brandon. Thank you so much. Caden, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. We'll taking a comment from an audience member. So Noah Lesvik says, would you say this anxiety of Islamic takeover has been influenced by certain media illustrating anti-immigrant rhetoric that is conducive to the emotions of fear?
Well, I don't want to say it's just the media, because my fellow comms department people would jump on me pretty harshly over that, but I don't think you can say it's just one thing. There's definitely plenty of pundits that are share a responsibility in their promotion of Islamophobia, but again, we forget that there was plenty of policies that really made it acceptable to view Muslims as a uniquely dangerous group within society. And I don't think it would be safe or responsible to ignore that.
Yeah, I think too, in one of the memes you showed referenced Member of Parliament MP Khalid, and I believe she was the one who brought forth the motion against Islamophobia in Canada, and it was insane. She received like 20,000 death threats and just terrible letters just for even trying to push that motion forward. So it seems that Islamophobia is kind of this, unfortunately, and almost an institution in some Western societies. But anyways, we'll go to another comment. So we got one from Nadia Hai. So she asks, what other types of media besides memes do individuals, articles, etc., share on these pages?
It's a good friend of mine. I think articles, it links to other media sources are huge. So if anywhere that these groups can sort of highlight sort of promote an Islamophobic agenda, as it were. So if there's an instance where, let's say in Germany, there was a Muslim individual, it doesn't matter what they did wrong. If they can determine that this person's Muslim, they're going to share that on this page. And they do have intricate networks, which is part of my dissertation. It sort of shows who they're connecting with and talking to. And it really seems like anywhere that they can find something that will disparage Muslims and Islam generally, they're going to jump on it. And that's mainly what these other sources of media are drawn on to do.
So I have a question. So like I'm on Facebook and I've seen like some posts being shared that are like at first they seem like fairly innocuous. They're like 70% of this money is going towards Syrian refugees and our pensioners only get this amount of money. And they're like obviously like if you unpack them, they're obviously implicitly like Islamophobic, but on the surface they seem kind of like, oh, we should just care about like old people and things like that. So I'm kind of wondering like those kind of more bland memes, they get shared on popular Facebook. What's the crossover between these kind of like esoteric extremist groups and these popular Facebook groups that seem to share these kind of more innocuous memes from these groups? Or are those groups creating them, or like what's kind of the crossover between them?
Well, I thank you for your question. The thing I've noticed is if they're saying like, oh, we're interested in, foreign aid is attacked, right? It's veterans, homeless. They'll even draw attention to the plight of First Nations people as well, and be like, why are we giving this money elsewhere, right? And they'll draw attention to some valid concerns. It's like we have a homeless problem in places like Toronto. But when you really look at the group, they're really just trying to divert funds away from groups outside of Canada that they despise. And I don't believe that you would see these groups then go on to try to solve homelessness necessarily. That would be a beyond generous interpretation of what it is that they're doing. However, it does sort of work on a level to appear logical, and perhaps that goes to Andrea's question. It's a good gateway, right? Because you can sit there and say, like, oh yeah, why would we donate money to that group when we have so many problems here, right? That does make sense, and it's sort of a sneaky communication strategy. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
We can't hear you, Brennan.
Is this better now? Okay, I was just saying, something that I've observed from being on all these various social media platforms for a while is that it seems as if the memes are largely presented as rhetoric in a form of comedy, right? And I think it becomes, it becomes incredibly hard to counter this form of propaganda when it's transmitted in such like a comedic sense almost, but with obviously very harmful undertones to it. So, I wonder if we could talk a bit more just about how we might begin to, counter this form of, radicalization.
Well, I don't have an answer really on how to counter radicalization for funny memes. Humor is definitely a huge part of what they do. Like that Justin Trudeau meme, right? Like you could see why people would find that appealing. He looks silly, definitely like out of touch, right? But again, I think I don't know how effective it would be in recruiting people, like because the rest of the comments, right, aside from memes, are so um, harmful that if somebody's not sort of already interested in, I don't know how effective it would be in recruiting, right? I'm not as up to date on radicalization literature as perhaps some of my colleagues are. But I do know that they're effective communicative devices, right? And if you can get someone laughing at something like discrimination, that's definitely a great weapon for them.
Yeah. Go ahead, Kelsey.
So, no, I just have an additional question for Andrea, since she's here and she's very kind to join us here. So, Andrea, we're just trying to understand that how do you kind of approach, this wider radicalizations against Winnipeg Police Services? Because we have seen in the social media groups like Winnipeg police cause harm. It was basically on the Twitter first, then I saw it transition to Facebook, large group of followers. So do you have a strategy, or how do you see these groups versus, because now it's quite a, us versus them sort of situation in our city. So any insight from you? Thank you.
Yeah, that I mean, it's definitely been a difficult time, I will say that. But I think, for law enforcement as a whole, I think I feel pretty comfortable in stating that I think most of us have the idea that by and large, most of the communities still support police. And by and large, most police know that we represent a cross-section of humanity. So hopefully 90, 95, 97% of us are in the profession for the right reasons. But, we still have that, 3% or 5% that maybe are, whether they're in it for the wrong reasons or something changes for them along the line. So I think, just trying to focus on staying involved with our communities, that's been a big thing. And definitely now I will say that, with what's happening online, especially in my unit in community relations, we really try to focus on staying in contact with our Muslim community, with our Jewish community, making sure that we have the right relationships for them so that we can be there for them if things do happen, whether it's, violence against them or they're starting to see maybe racist graffiti, that type of thing, that we have those relationships in place in advance. And then trying to remind ourselves, as we would if we weren't police or we were some other group, that you're always going to have people that don't like you, and you're always going to have people that think you're doing a crappy job as a researcher, as a banker, as a a mortgage broker, whatever you are, and just keep keeping on, I guess, is really what it's all about. And then seeing a lot of the research that's being done, especially on platforms like this, and what people are doing here. All of us are busy working on our degrees and trying to become more educated, I think, so that we can make a difference out in the communities and maybe recognize, some of the issues or some of the ways and maybe that we can help. Not just law enforcement. You can't arrest your way out of these problems. There are community problems here.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you very much.
We'll pull another question from the audience.
Could I ask a question?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Of Andrea? Hi, Andrea. I was just wondering, do you ever get the sense that these groups, like the ones I mentioned, are more fond of you depending on the political party that's in power?
More fond of law enforcement?
Yeah, like let's say there's a conservative politician in power. Are they thinking that, okay, the police have our interests at heart now, as opposed to a liberal politician? Then it seems like the police are sort of the weapon of liberal policies.
I don't know. I think maybe the slight majority would, but I think that we're always going to do something unpopular. And I always tell people, my son is away at school learning how to become a firefighter. So he's at fire college. My daughter wants to be a paramedic, and I'm a police officer. So we will have covered the spectrum of first responders across the three of us. And my daughter and I enjoy picking on my son because we always say to him, everybody loves firefighters. And they do. They're seldom bashed in the media and by the public. But I always say, nobody ever phones a firefighter and has them show up on Christmas Day to arrest somebody out of their house. That's the police thing. So it's naturally unpopular. So I think that you're always going to find those that support and those that don't. I think the biggest thing really for reminding ourselves is just remembering that we don't pick political parties. We don't have affiliations with them. Our whole job really is just to enforce the criminal code. And that comes from government that's, decades in the making, I'll say.
Thank you.
So we'll go back to a question from Nadia. And so Nadia asked, did you find many memes that were shared by more than one of the selected groups?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of the UN paranoia, I didn't put those stats up. I should have, but a lot of UN paranoia sort of had cross group significance. Anything about a carbon tax, a lot of concern about halal certification had cross group significance. They sort of have these like charts. It's like, oh, this group here funds this, funds that, and they make it try to appear scientific. So that it's like the more let's say insidious sort of posts had more cross group significance, I noticed.
Kind of thinking too, like within your perspective, do you think that a lot of the groups you monitored had members who were involved with all the groups or multiple groups, and they're just essentially sharing the same material? Because there's a recent report that came out. I think it was that Canadians are extremely active on these like extremist channels, and there was about 630, but it was kind of speculated that a lot of them sort of circulate within that same ecosystem anyways. So do you think that there might be, let's say, a significant amount of people on each group, or it's essentially just all compromised the same individuals just attempting to sort of make the movement bigger?
I don't have data on individuals that were part of these groups. I didn't collect it. That's not my job as a researcher, nor would it get through any ethics board. I do believe that there's a lot of crossover between the individuals. I don't have the data to prove that, but there were names that looked familiar to me.
Okay, then. If you allow me, Brandon, a question to you. So it might look very stupid, but I was thinking, for example, in our childhood, we used to read a lot of comic books, right? Superheroes, so Wonder Woman, and all. So, I mean, will those be treated as memes? And now what we see in all the social media platforms, these different types of messages. So what is the difference between two, and do you see these memes are kind of connected to radicalization process of an extremist? Do they produce extremist? Because we have questions coming from audience. Somebody named Kupi BAP, so he is also saying the same thing, that is there any correlation between memes and radicalization? And so this is how I thought that I should frame my question.
Okay, so I'll start with the first part then. Thank you. Memes versus comics. I do think that they're a distinct form of communication. However, you will see that a comic does get turned into a meme. There's one I recall, it's a Batman, I think like slapping Robin or something, and that gets turned into a meme, and it's usually to like cut somebody off. It's used as a way to like dismiss a bad policy or a certain group. So that to me would be making the comic a meme. However, I haven't really thought that through, but at the top of my head, that's what I'm thinking in that part. As far as radicalization goes, um, I don't know, to be quite frank. I don't know if this would encourage someone to become radicalized. I think I've probably consumed more hateful memes than anyone in these groups. I have like hundreds of thousands of them stored on my hard drive. You know, I'm pretty boring individual, and I haven't bought the rhetoric. So I don't know. I really don't know how that works.
Thank you. Thank you.
I was thinking about this last year when I was researching a lot of the like memes on 4chan and Telegram, and they're extremely explicit and frankly quite disgusting. But I found that over about 6 days of looking at them through my paper, I became so desensitized to them that it's not necessarily a form of radicalization, but you stop getting shocked by it. And I kind of at that aspect sort of understood the whole echo chamber, right? So I don't know if this is true, but this is just my hypothesis that you'll have an individual who might be lonely and they'll go on 4chan, and initially they'll see a couple memes that are jokes, and then of course over time they have this Islamophobic, anti-Semitic, racist, homophobic tinge to it, and then next thing you know they might kind of go deeper into the hole, and they're on Telegram and they're following the neo-Nazi channels, etc. But I myself don't know how true that is, but that's kind of the feeling I got when looking at it. So when you were researching this, did you find yourself becoming sort of desensitized to, I guess, some of the more abhorrent aspects of what you're reviewing?
I wouldn't say desensitized, because like when I look at them, it still troubles me. Like it's problematic material, but I've been doing this for years now, and when I first saw it, it was definitely more troubling to me than it is now. That's not to suggest that I can see them and not see like, oh, this is clearly problematic, but it probably doesn't have the shock value it once did. Maybe that's what's worn off, is the shock value. Perhaps I wasn't expecting to see so much of it initially, and then sort of my expectations dropped, and it's kind of like, well, of course I'm going to see that now. Does that make sense?
No, yeah, it absolutely does. We'll kind of, before we conclude, we'll take a couple more comments. So we'll go to the Koopy Bap. It's a very good alias. So he writes that, how can you gauge whether targeted memes are legitimately expressing distaste for the target? Could they not be simply jokes? And another comment he kind of puts below is, CNN is making fun of Trump, while Fox makes fun of Biden. So obviously these are not very insidious. So I guess, how do you determine whether one meme is insidious or meant to sort of spark, not radicalization, but a more nefarious background to it, let's say?
Okay, so I see the question. It seems memes, jokes are primary mode. The first part of the question was basic. Oh, I'm sorry, I kind of missed it because it's popping up. Oh, I don't know if I can. I guess part of it is sort of looking at the source, right? Like I'm looking at groups that I believe and I've identified as being supportive of right-wing extremism. So their manifestos, if you were, are extremely offensive. The posts and commentary, aside from memes, sort of create this very toxic atmosphere. And I guess I'm not probably giving them the benefit of the doubt. Um, I I don't know. It's a fair question. Perhaps you could write a good counterpiece to mine about the humor in it. I personally didn't find it funny, but maybe that's my lack of imagination.
So I'm just wondering, so I'm not really sure what your knowledge of like popular memes are, more mainstream memes, but did you notice like a lot of crossover between those kind of memes that are like super popular right now, like a celebrity does an interview or something and then they become memeified right after, and like kind of, did you see that reflected in those groups, or do you think they're making such like specific things, or, you know what I mean? Like, are they trying to target a younger audience by utilizing these popular memes?
That's an awesome question because I didn't consider it when I first started this, right? Because this was sort of since 2019. But I'll tell you, the minute I saw the memes popping up from this past Super Bowl with The Weeknd, where he looks hazy in that sort of a glass background, I was wondering how that was going to get turned into something supporting these groups. So my long sort of winded answer here of going around saying, I don't know off the top of my head how it's going to be used, but I think you're right to assume that it will.
We'll take a question from Yagmir Orko. He asks, what would you say are the most effective methods Canadian right-wing extremist groups utilize to prepare their members / prospects for violence? So I guess what you might have seen within the memes that would perhaps drive this.
A lot of the groups, like the 3%ers, post I think in the second category, the self-promotion ones, I call them action shots. And basically what it is they're always talking about how they're really interested in airsoft, right? Which is really just them, disguising their militia-like activities, right? So I think anything that's sort of encouraging people to go out there and be like, oh, let's start working on military training, that's probably the most effective. Um, as far as I can see, right? Like I know that there's people that have gone on to commit acts of violence that aren't exposed to these things. All right. But if I'm to sit there and look at the content that I believe would be most likely to lead to violence, it's the ones encouraging people to get military like skills so that they can defend against an Islamic invasion. And this isn't my, assumption. They've written this quite clearly in their group manifestos. And that's part of my dissertation work. So I'm quite confident saying this.
Yeah, and I'd like to add something in that too, Brandon. Like I totally agree with you when it comes to the 3%ers, but if you look like a group, if you look at like the incel community, completely very different, not a lot of crossover. We'll say they're sort of the one group that's by themselves. They inspire their violence across that group straight up by inspiring violence, just with the actual, throw acid in their face, kill the, insert bad word here, I won't use it. It is in your face. It is about as inspiring as it possibly can get, as opposed to even sort of more of the, hey, try this type of training. Let's work on, team building, that type of thing. It is extremely blunt when it comes to the incel community and how they inspire violence, for sure, frighteningly so.
Yeah, absolutely. I was actually kind of looking at some incel forums last week, and this was the first time I viewed them. And I was surprised because it's right there in your face, like you stated. While I think the conspiracy theorists and everyone, on the other forums tend to sort of not necessarily hide around it, but they're not as explicit right away. Like you kind of have to search a little more to see that. But anyways, I think that's a good place to leave it. I want to thank everyone in the audience for taking part in viewing. This was our first live webinar. I think it went extremely well. I want to thank Brandon Regato for his presentation. It was extremely interesting. And I hope some members of the audience kind of look into this a bit more after, because there's a lot to it. I'd like to thank Officer Andre Lafort for joining us today and providing her perspective as a police officer with the Winnipeg Police Service. And I'd like to thank my fellow members, Brennan and Aluk, for joining me. And of course, Dr. Kautsar Ahmed for organizing this webinar in conjunction with Realize Radicalization.
Thank you very much. And once again, on behalf of Conflict and Resilience Research Institute Canada, I would like to express my gratitude to Brandon Regato and Officer Andrea Lefort to be with us and join in a very critical discussion. And as audience, you must have heard the expert opinions, those who are researching on this issue, and why it is so important to understand what is changing in our society in terms of our values and our inspirations. Thank you once again for joining us. Have a nice rest of the evening. Bye-bye.